The engine died at 11:47 p.m. No warning, no cough, no shudder, no slow degradation that gives you time to ease onto the shoulder while you still have control. Nothing like that. It was a cut, clean and total, like someone had pulled a breaker on everything at once. The dashboard went dark. The headlights vanished. The CB radio died mid-static, and the Peterbilt started bleeding speed on the loneliest stretch of I-40 between Flagstaff and Gallup, mile marker 333, with cracked asphalt under the tires and no light visible in any direction. December 24th, 11:47 p.m. I had 8 hours and 13 minutes left in my logbook before federal hours of service regulations would force me to stop regardless. I had fuel for another 300 miles. I had a confirmed dispatch. Delivery to Albuquerque, Sunrise Distribution Warehouse on South Broadway, receiving window opening at 6 a.m. on December 25th and closing at 8. A 2-hour window. If I pulled in at 8:01, the backup driver Kramer Logistics had on standby would collect the delivery fee. I'd forfeit the Christmas bonus, and the company's contract clause would kick in. Second late delivery in a quarter triggered a termination review. This was my second late delivery of the quarter. So when the engine died, I didn't curse, didn't hit the steering wheel. I sat in the dark for maybe 10 seconds, which is longer than it sounds, when the only thing you can hear is the wind coming off the high desert and the faint ticking of a cooling engine that shouldn't be cooling yet. And I did what 26 years on the road teaches you to do first. I counted what I had. I had a CB radio that might or might not work on battery backup. I had a flashlight. I had tools. I had a spare parts box behind the passenger seat that I'd been adding to for a decade, one small component at a time, because mechanics at the side of the road are a luxury you learn not to count on. I had 1 bar of cell signal that blinked and disappeared every 40 seconds, and I had, by my best calculation, roughly 6 hours to make 147 miles, or lose the job. That's what I had. I reached for the CB first. Channel 19. Any eastbound between Flagstaff and Gallup, I've got a Peterbilt down on the shoulder, mile marker 333. Engine failure, complete electrical dropout. Need a good Samaritan or a relay to Kramer Logistics dispatch. Anyone copy? Static. Wind. More static. I tried my phone next. The call to Tommy Reeves, 22 years old, never driven a commercial vehicle in his life, spending Christmas Eve monitoring the Kramer fleet from an air-conditioned office in Phoenix, dropped twice before it connected. When it finally went through, Tommy told me he was going to log the incident and initiate roadside assistance protocol, which, in practice, meant I was going to wait. The contracted towing company for that stretch of I-40 was out of Winslow, 46 miles west. Response time on a normal night was 90 minutes. On Christmas Eve, at midnight, with half the crew home with their families. Tommy didn't finish that sentence. He didn't have to. I hung up before I said something that couldn't be unsaid. Let me tell you about 26 years, because you need to understand what was sitting in that darkened cab besides me. I started driving at 23. Not because I had a calling, not because I loved the road the way some guys do. Not at first, anyway. I started because my father died and left more debts than belongings, and driving was the only trade I had inherited that was worth anything. My dad ran a truck for 18 years with a company called Consolidated Freight out of Memphis. I spent every weekend I could in the cab with him, from the time I was 6 until the time he got sick and couldn't drive anymore. I learned to change a tire before I learned to drive a car. I knew how to read a way station sign, how to work the CB, how to back a 53-foot trailer into a dock by age 14. It wasn't education, it was osmosis. You sit next to someone long enough, you become some version of them. When he died, I was 23, and I had a certificate, a CDLA, and a phone number for a regional carrier out of Nashville that he'd given me 6 months before the end. He said, "If you ever need work, call Mike Denton. Tell him your father sent you." I called Mike Denton 3 weeks after the funeral. He said he remembered my father. He gave me a run to St. Louis. That was 1998. I've been moving freight ever since. Refrigerated loads, dry van, flatbed, hazmat. I've hauled most of it at one point or another. I drove for 4 different carriers before landing at Kramer Logistics 8 years ago, which is the longest I've stayed anywhere. Not because Kramer is good. It isn't, particularly. It's adequate. It pays on time. The equipment is maintained well enough that you don't spend every run wondering if the brakes are going to hold on a mountain grade. For a man who spent 3 years at a carrier where the trucks were held together by optimism and zip ties, adequate feels like luxury. I never married. I came close once. A woman in Knoxville named Sandra, who waited 2 years before deciding that the math didn't work for her. She wasn't wrong. I don't hold it against her. There was a version of me that could have made it work, and I buried that version somewhere on a long deadhead through the plains of Nebraska in 2003, and I didn't dig it back up. Some things you let go not because you stop caring, but because the road has a way of making you honest about what's actually possible. What I'm saying is, that cab was my home in the truest sense. The Peterbilt 379. I was driving that night. It wasn't mine, it was Kramer's. But the cab was arranged exactly the way I arranged every cab I've ever driven. Flashlight in the same spot, tools in the same order. The small photograph clipped to the visor. My father behind the wheel of a blue Kenworth, 1991, somewhere in Tennessee, grinning like a man who has everything he needs. Every truck I've driven in 26 years has had that photograph on the visor. It's the only personal item I carry that isn't practical. Sitting in that dark cab, staring at that photograph lit only by the blinking cell signal, I had a feeling I don't get often. It wasn't panic. I've been in worse spots than a broken-down truck on a cold night. It was closer to embarrassment. 26 years, and the engine quit without a single warning, and I hadn't felt it coming. That bothered me more than the situation itself. I went back to the CB. Eastbound I-40, mile marker 333. Peterbilt down, electrical failure, load secured, driver okay. Need any kind of assist. Merry Christmas to whoever's out there. I waited. 5 minutes of static. Then, a voice. Low, slightly rough around the edges. A regional accent I couldn't quite place on first hearing, somewhere between the Gulf Coast and the Midwest, the kind of voice that's been shaped by too many states to belong to just one. Driver at 333, I got you. Name's Earl. I'm eastbound, running about 12 minutes back. What are you looking at? Complete electrical dropout. No codes, no prior warning, no overheat. Just died. Year and model? 2009, Peterbilt, 379. A pause. Not a long one. What's your load? Medical equipment. Sealed. Sunrise distribution. Albuquerque. Delivery window opens at 6. Another pause. Shorter this time. Sit tight. I'm coming. If you've ever been broken down on a dark highway in the middle of the night, no lights, cold coming through the door seals, a load you're responsible for, and a clock you can't stop, you know what those 2 words mean. Not just logistically. There's something that releases in your chest when someone says, "I'm coming," and you believe them. I don't know Earl's last name yet at that point. I don't know anything about him, but I believed him. He arrived in 11 minutes. A Kenworth T680 in dark red with all the marker lights on, running lights and cab lights, giving it the look of something alive and warm in the middle of all that cold dark. He pulled past me, braked, reversed slowly until he was parallel. Killed the engine. Stepped down. Earl was maybe 60. Could have been 65. Hard to say. Men who've spent decades in the weather carry their age differently. The lines go deeper, but the body stays functional longer. He was broad across the shoulders, wearing a work coat in dark olive green that had clearly been through things, and he carried a proper headlamp, the kind you strap to your forehead, and a tool roll that he unrolled on my front bumper without asking permission or saying much at all. "Pop the hood," he said. I did. He spent exactly 3 minutes looking at the engine, not poking around randomly, looking with the focused attention of someone who knows what they're searching for and is confirming what they already suspected. Ignition relay, he said. Common failure on this generation when the temperature drops fast. You carry a spare? I did carry a spare. I'd been carrying it for 2 years without needing it, in a small plastic parts box behind the passenger seat, because a mechanic in Amarillo had told me during a routine service that the Olo 9379 had a known pattern of relay failures in cold weather, and that any driver running the Southwest in winter should have one on hand. I had never needed it. Until now. Behind the passenger seat, I said. Parts box, red lid. Earl didn't wait for me to get it. He stepped up into the cab from the passenger side like he'd done it 1,000 times, found the box, found the relay, stepped back down. He had the old relay out and the new one seated in just under 6 minutes. The work was clean, certain, no wasted motion. Try it, he said. I turned the key. The engine caught on the first revolution. The dashboard lit up. Gauges rising, indicator lights cycling through their startup sequence, the CB radio coming back on with a burst of static and a country station I wasn't listening to. The heater kicked in almost immediately, and I realized how cold I'd gotten sitting in that dead cab. I looked at the clock. 12:31 a.m. 5 hours and 29 minutes to the delivery window. Earl was already rolling up his toolkit. What do I owe you? I said. He shook his head, didn't look up from the tools. You've got a delivery to make. Earl, Merry Christmas. He picked up the tool roll. Get moving. Where are you headed? He stopped, looked at me for a second. Not unfriendly, but something in his expression shifted, just briefly, before he answered. East, he said. Same direction as you. He walked back to the Kenworth. I watched him go because I didn't know what else to do. If you're listening to this right now, if you've stayed with me this far, you know how rare it is for someone to stop. You know how the math works against it. Everyone on this road has a load and a clock, and stopping costs time that doesn't come back. Earl did the math the same way every other driver does, and he stopped anyway. If you want to hear what happened next, what Earl left in that cab, and what it took me 3 days to understand, subscribe to this channel right now, because this story isn't over, and the next part is the part I've spent 2 years trying to figure out how to tell. I pulled back onto the I-40 eastbound at 12:34 a.m. The road opened up in front of me, and the Arizona desert did what the Arizona desert does at night in December, which is something that people who've never driven it can't fully picture from a description. It's not dark the way a city is dark, where the darkness is just the absence of lights that are always nearby. It's a different quality of dark. The sky out there is too clear, too full of stars, cold and distant, and the land on both sides of the highway is rock and scrub, and the occasional silhouette of a butte that the headlights catch for a second before the road curves away. The temperature was 29 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. The asphalt was dry in most places, but I'd already seen the glitter that means ice on the shaded patches under overpasses. I set my cruise at 62. Not 65, not 70. 62, because that's the number where the fuel economy stays reasonable, the trailer tracks clean, and if a patch of black ice comes up under an overpass, I've got enough reaction distance to correct without losing the back end. My father taught me that. He used to say, the road will give you everything you need if you don't ask it for more than it can offer. The CB stayed quiet for the first 20 miles out of where Earl had found me. I kept it on channel 19 out of habit, the volume low enough that it wouldn't distract, but loud enough that I'd hear if anyone was transmitting. Most of the night runs on that stretch are quiet between midnight and 2 a.m. The late-night crowd has either pulled over to sleep or they're running hard and not talking. The talkers come back around 3, when the long-haul guys who started the night's run at 8 or 9 are starting to feel the miles and need something to stay sharp. I was thinking about Earl's voice, about the accent I couldn't quite place. 40 miles east of where the engine had died, I passed a truck stop, a TA travel center, the lights blazing out into the desert dark like something out of a fever dream, a cluster of diesel pumps, and a diner, and a repair bay, and the silhouettes of maybe 15 trucks parked in the lot. I thought about stopping. Not because I needed fuel, I'd fueled in Flagstaff, but because something made me want to see other people, hear noise that wasn't the engine and the road. I kept going. At the Gallup exit, I stopped. Flying J, open 24 hours, which on the I-40 in New Mexico means there's always someone at the counter, and the coffee is always reasonably fresh because the turnover is constant. I pulled in, topped off the tank because Gallup is the last comfortable fuel stop before the terrain starts working against you, and went inside. The woman behind the counter was maybe 45, hair pulled back, Flying J jacket over a red Christmas sweater, a small pin on her lapel, one of those blinking holiday pins running on a dying battery, the blink too slow to be festive, too fast to be subtle. She was watching something on a small tablet propped against the register, and she set it face down when I walked up, which I appreciated. I paid for the diesel and a coffee that she poured from a fresh pot she'd started maybe 10 minutes before. I could tell from the color and the smell, and after 26 years, you learn to read coffee the way you read a road. "Merry Christmas," I said. I don't know why I said it. Habit, probably. Or maybe I just wanted to say something human to another human at that hour. She looked up. The kind of look that takes a half second and reads a lot. The face of a driver running overnight, the set of the shoulders, the quality of tired. She smiled, and it was the real kind, not the customer service kind. "You too. Long night?" "Getting longer. Albuquerque by 6. She whistled low. Not dramatized, just the honest acknowledgement of someone who understands what that sentence means at 1 in the morning. "Christmas delivery?" "Medical equipment. Somebody on the other end needs it, whether it's a holiday or not." She nodded, like that made complete sense, which it did. "Coffee's good tonight. I made a fresh pot 20 minutes ago because I needed it myself." I could tell. She smiled again. "Drive safe." I went back to the truck. The coffee was hot, and I put it in the cup holder, and I sat for 2 minutes before pulling out, which is something I do at fuel stops. 2 minutes of nothing. Engine running, cup in the holder, nothing moving. My father called it resetting the clock. You've been running for hours, your mind is on the road, and you stop, and you breathe for 2 minutes, and then you start fresh. It sounds like nothing. It does something. I pulled back onto the I-40 eastbound at 1:48 a.m. New Mexico is different from Arizona in ways that are subtle at first, and then obvious. The desert continues, but the color changes. The rock formations shift from the deep red of the Arizona high desert to a sandier ochre. The terrain flattens and then rises again in a different rhythm. And in December, in the dark, the snow becomes a factor. Not the heavy snow of the Rockies, not the kind that shuts passes and sends chains across the highway in red-letter warnings on the darty boards. This was the thin, dry snow that the high desert gets in winter, the kind that settles on the asphalt in a layer you can barely see, almost transparent, that catches your headlights only at certain angles. The kind that doesn't look dangerous until the trailer starts to float. My external thermometer read 27 degrees. I pulled back to 55 miles an hour, which I didn't like doing. Every mile per hour below the pace cost me time I didn't have to spare. But 40 years of other drivers' decisions in bad weather had taught me the math on that trade-off too. A late arrival costs a bonus and a contract clause. A rolled trailer on the I-40 costs more than I could calculate. The CB came alive around 2:15. "Eastbound 40? Anyone in the mix?" A man's voice, relaxed, clearly at the beginning of his alertness curve rather than the end. "Eastbound, just past mile 43, I said. "Little bit of thin snow on the high sections. Nothing that stops you, but watch your speed." "Copied. What are you hauling?" "Medical. You?" "Produce. Heading to Amarillo. Name's Ronaldo." "Ray," I said. "That's what people call me on the CB. Not my real name, which is Raymond, but Ray, which is shorter and doesn't require the other party to remember anything complicated." "Ray, Feliz Navidad, man." "Same to you, Ronaldo. Watch your mirrors on the icy patches." "Always. You got time on your delivery?" Tight. 4 hours, give or take. You'll make it. He said it the way drivers say things on the CB, not as reassurance exactly, but as a statement of the obvious. You've got 4 hours and roughly 90 miles. Of course you'll make it. The math says you'll make it. But hearing someone else say it at 2:15 in the morning on a quiet highway carries more weight than the math does. Thanks, Ronaldo. Roll safe. He clicked off. The channel went back to static. There's something about conversations on Channel 19 that I've thought about more than I should probably admit. They're the shortest, meaningful exchanges I know. You don't know who you're talking to. A face, a history, a reason they're on the road at 2 in the morning on Christmas. You know a name they gave you and a direction they're heading and whatever their load is. And in the space of 2 minutes, you establish something that isn't friendship. It's harder to name than friendship. And then you both go back to your respective silences. Ronaldo heading to Amarillo. Me heading to Albuquerque. 100 miles later, we'll both be in different states of tired, and neither of us will remember the other's voice with any detail. And that's fine. That's the correct size for what it was. What it was not being alone. The next hour on the road was the kind that the job gives you sometimes. Long, quiet, everything working the way it should, the engine holding steady at the RPMs you've set, the trailer tracking without complaint, the road unfolding in front of the headlights with its ordinary pattern of mile markers and lane stripes and the occasional green highway sign telling you what's coming and how far. In that kind of quiet, your mind goes where it goes. I started thinking about Earl, not about what he'd done, stopping, fixing the relay, refusing payment. I'd thought about that already and filed it under things I understood. Some drivers are built that way, some people are built that way, and gratitude is the appropriate response. And beyond that, you don't need to analyze it. What I kept circling back to was something smaller. The way he'd moved in the cab when he went to get the relay. He'd stepped up from the passenger side and found the parts box without looking around the cab first. He'd gone directly to the area behind the passenger seat. I'd told him the box was there. That's why he went there. That's the obvious explanation. But I hadn't told him it was behind the passenger seat. I'd said, behind the passenger seat, red lid, which means I'd confirmed the location he was already moving toward. It's a small thing. It's probably nothing. The passenger side storage area is a standard location on a Peterbilt 379, and anyone who'd driven one or worked on one would know to look there first. Earl was clearly a man who knew trucks. There was a completely ordinary explanation. I kept not being satisfied by the ordinary explanation. Around 3:10 a.m., the lights of Albuquerque started to appear on the eastern horizon. Not the city itself yet, but the atmospheric glow of it, the orange-amber wash that any city throws up into the sky above it, visible from 40 miles out when the terrain is flat and the night is clear. In the high desert of New Mexico, a city on the horizon at 3 in the morning looks like something biblical, like a promise or a warning, depending on what you're carrying toward it. I had 2 hours and 50 minutes to the delivery window opening, 80 miles left. The math was comfortable now. Barring something catastrophic, I was going to make it. The relay was holding. The road was open. The snow had thinned out as I'd descended in elevation after the high country west of Albuquerque, and the asphalt was clear and dry. I gave myself one more fuel stop. Not because I needed fuel, but because I'd been running for hours, and the coffee from Gallup had done its work and was finished, and there was a pilot travel center at the Rio Puerco exit that I knew from experience had the best coffee on this stretch of road at any hour. It was a small thing, a 3-minute stop. But 3 minutes of standing outside the cab in the cold air, hearing the diesel pumps running for somebody else, watching the truck stop lights make orange pools on the concrete, sometimes that's what gets you through the last hour. The kid behind the counter at the pilot couldn't have been more than 20. He had the look of someone who had drawn the short straw on Christmas Eve scheduling and was philosophical about it. He was reading something on his phone when I came in, slid it into his pocket without being asked, and poured my coffee. "Late run?" he said. "Albuquerque by 6. He looked at the clock on the wall. 3:22 a.m. He nodded slowly. "You've got it." as long as nothing else goes wrong. Had something go wrong earlier? Engine failure. A guy on the CB helped me out. He tilted his head. Another driver? Yeah. Came out of nowhere. Swapped the relay himself. Wouldn't take anything for it. The kid considered this for a moment. Christmas thing? Maybe. I took the coffee. Or just a good driver. Is there a difference? I looked at him. He wasn't being philosophical. He was asking a real question, with the directness of someone too young and too tired to waste words on anything decorative. I don't know, I said. I've been thinking about that. He nodded, like that was a satisfying answer. I paid and went back to the truck. The last stretch into Albuquerque I've driven enough times that it's stored somewhere below the level of active thought. The terrain flattens, the median widens, the highway expands to 3 lanes, and on the east, the Sandia Mountains begin to appear in silhouette against a sky that, by 4:30 a.m., in late December, was starting to show the first imperceptible lightening on the horizon. Not dawn yet, nothing close to dawn, but the night shifting its weight slightly, the stars at the zenith still hard and clear, but the eastern edge beginning to lose its absolute black. I picked up the CB one more time. Channel 19, not looking for anything in particular. Earl, I said, if you're still somewhere on this road, thank you. Static. I waited maybe 30 seconds. Then, faint, like he was already much farther away than 12 miles should account for. Keep your eyes open, Ray. That's all. I sat with that for a while. Keep your eyes open. It's a phrase that means something specific on the road. Watch the road. Watch the weather. Watch the truck in front of you. But it's also a phrase that means something else, depending on who says it and when. My father used to say it, not about driving specifically. He said it about everything. When I was a kid, and I'd ask him how he knew something, how he spotted a problem before anyone else did, he'd say, "You keep your eyes open, and things show themselves. You don't have to chase them." I hadn't thought about that in years. The Sunrise Distribution Warehouse on South Broadway is the kind of industrial facility that looks exactly the same at every hour. A long, flat building with a corrugated metal roof, dock doors numbered in yellow paint, a security light on each corner that makes the loading area look like the inside of a fish tank. The parking lot is asphalt with expansion cracks that the Albuquerque freeze-thaw cycle widens every year. There's always a trash can next to the driver's entrance with a lid that doesn't fit right. These are the details you notice when you've been to a place enough times, when the place isn't somewhere you're going, but somewhere you're delivering to, which is a different relationship. I pulled into the lot at 5:51 a.m. The receiving dock didn't open until 6. I had 9 minutes. I killed the engine and sat. This is the part that people outside the industry don't quite understand. The stop. After hours of motion, of managing everything that moves and everything that can go wrong, the moment the truck stops and you know you've made it, there's a stillness that settles into the cab that is its own thing entirely. It's not relief exactly. It's quieter than relief. The engine ticking as it cools, the heater running on its own, the first grey light of Christmas morning coming in through the windshield. I looked at my father's photograph on the visor, grinning. 1991. Behind the wheel of a blue Kenworth in Tennessee. The happiest I remember him looking in any photograph I have. He loved the road the way I came to love it eventually. Not at first, when it was just the trade I'd inherited, but over time, when the road became the place where I made the most sense to myself. He never talked about other drivers specifically. He talked about the CB, about the community of it, about how the channel was always there. He said, "You can drive from Maine to California and never be alone if you keep the radio on." I was 12 when he said that. I didn't know what he meant then. At 6:02 a.m., I backed the trailer into Dock 7. Marcus, the receiving supervisor, came out with a clipboard and a travel mug. He was a man in his mid-50s, grey mustache, moving with the measured pace of someone who'd been awake since 4 and was on his second cup. He looked at my face before he looked at the paperwork. "You make it from Flagstaff overnight?" he said. "Had a stop in the middle. Engine trouble." He raised an eyebrow. "And you still made your window?" "Had help." Marcus looked at me for a second, like he was trying to decide if that was the setup for something. Then he took the delivery manifest and signed it. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Same to you." The unloading took 48 minutes. The lumpers Marcus had on shift that morning, two guys named Deshawn and Arturo, who clearly knew each other well enough to work in silence, moved the medical equipment with the kind of careful efficiency you want to see when the cargo is things that keep people alive. I stood clear and let them work. I was pulling out of the Sunrise lot at 6:58 a.m., an hour to spare. I found a motel 2 miles north on Central Avenue, one of those places that's been a motel since the 1960s and has never updated much beyond the sign, which still had the original letter marquee, half the letters replaced over the decades with ones that didn't quite match. The kind of place where the night clerk is also the morning clerk because it's Christmas and the other guy called in. He was a man of about 60, heavy-set, who handed me a room key, an actual metal key, not a card, without ceremony. "Checkout's at 11, he said. "We don't do housekeeping on holidays." "Fine by me." Room 14 was exactly what I expected. A queen bed, a bathroom with a shower head that worked well enough, a TV bolted to the dresser, a window looking out at the parking lot, and beyond it, the Sandia Mountains catching the first real light of Christmas morning. The sky above them was going from gray to pink to the first pale blue of day. I stood at the window for a while without turning on the TV. I should have gone to sleep. I was running on maybe 36 hours of light rest and a night's worth of highway. But first, I went back to the truck. I went back because I'd left my logbook on the passenger seat. I needed to complete the record before I slept, before the details of the night got fuzzy. I climbed up into the cab from the driver's side, reached across for the logbook, and then I noticed something. The parts box, red lid, behind the passenger seat. I'd forgotten to close it after Earl had taken the relay. The lid was sitting slightly askew, not sealed. I reached back and fixed it, and in fixing it, picking the lid up to seat it properly, I felt the weight difference. The box was heavier than it should have been. I took the box out and set it on the passenger seat, opened the lid. On top of the organized rows of spare fuses and relays and small components that I'd built up over years, there was an envelope. Padded, business-sized, sealed. No name, no writing on the outside. Just the envelope, sitting on top of everything else. I picked it up. I knew what it was before I opened it. Not from logic, from weight and density. You handle freight for 26 years. You develop a physical vocabulary. You know what paper feels like and what it doesn't feel like. This felt like currency, tightly packed. I sat in the passenger seat of my own truck on Christmas morning in an Albuquerque parking lot with the mountains turning gold in the east, and I opened the envelope. $80,000. Hundreds, 50s, a few 20s at the edges. Organized with the kind of neatness that suggested they'd been counted. No note, no explanation. Nothing but the money and the envelope it came in. I sat there for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and found the text notification from 4:16 a.m., the one I'd missed while I was pushing through the last stretch of the run, which I now read for the first time. It was from a number I didn't know. "Your father asked me to look out for you when he couldn't anymore. Took me a few years to find the right moment. Merry Christmas, son. Earl Hutchins. Your dad and I ran together for 11 years under Consolidated Freight out of Memphis." I read it 3 times. Then I called the number. It rang 4 times and went to a voicemail that said only the phone number back to me in that automated voice with no name attached. I left a message. I don't remember exactly what I said. Something inadequate. The kind of words you reach for when the words that would actually be sufficient don't exist yet. I know I said thank you. I know I said I had questions. I know my voice wasn't entirely steady, which hasn't happened in a very long time. I tried the number again 2 hours later, and again that evening. The third day after Christmas, the number was disconnected. I want to be honest with you about what I did next, because I think it matters for understanding what this story actually is. I drove back to where the engine had died, mile marker 333 on the I-40 west of Gallup, 3 days after Christmas. Not because I had a run in that direction, but because I went specifically. I don't fully know what I was expecting to find. Tire marks in the gravel, maybe. Something physical that confirmed what had happened. I found exactly what you'd expect to find. An empty accostamento, gravel and scrub brush, the I-40 running east and west into the distance. No evidence of anything. I called Consolidated Freight in Memphis. They had records going back to 1988. I asked about a driver named Earl Hutchins. After 20 minutes on hold, the woman who came back on the line told me that an Earl Hutchins had driven for Consolidated from 1984 to 1995. He had retired from the company in good standing. The last address they had on file was in Meridian, Mississippi, and it was from 1995. She also told me that a driver named Walter Reyes, my father's name, had driven for Consolidated from 1982 to 1993, when he had taken medical leave that ultimately became permanent. 11 years. She confirmed it before I could ask. I sat with that for a while too. I hired a skip trace service, the kind that freelance investigators use when they're trying to find people who aren't necessarily trying to be found. I gave them Earl Hutchins, Meridian, Mississippi, age approximately 60 to 65, former commercial driver. I told them to take their time. They came back in 3 weeks with a report that told me there was an Earl James Hutchins, born 1960, licensed CDLA, last known address in Meridian, Mississippi, who had owned a small independent trucking operation, 2 trucks, himself and 1 other driver, from 2001 to 2019. The business had been dissolved in 2019. There were no current registrations in his name, no current address, no active phone numbers. The last verifiable record of him was a vehicle registration renewal in 2021. After that, nothing. The envelope is in a safety deposit box at a Wells Fargo branch in Tucson. I haven't touched the money. I haven't counted it again since Christmas morning in that Albuquerque parking lot. I don't know that I'm going to. There's something about leaving it there, sealed in that institution, in that box behind that key, that keeps the question open. As long as I don't spend it, I haven't accepted something I don't fully understand yet. My father never mentioned Earl Hutchins to me. Not once in the years he was alive, not in any of the conversations we had about the road, about his driving years, about Consolidated. I've thought about why, and the only answer I can come up with that makes any sense is that Earl was part of a version of my father's life that he didn't bring home. The road version, the man he was in the cab and at the truck stops and on the CB, which might have been different from the version that came home on weekends. I've been that man. I know that version of yourself. There are things I know on the road that I would never say at a kitchen table. I think about that night on the I-40 differently than I think about most things that have happened to me. Not because of the money. The money is the smallest part of it, and I mean that literally. I think about the relay. About Earl finding it without looking, going directly to where it was kept. About a voice on the CB that didn't make me wait an hour and a half for a tow truck from Winslow, but instead arrived in 11 minutes in the direction I would have needed help to come from. I've been on the road 26 years. I know how help works on the highway. It's random. It's impersonal. It's a stranger passing at the right moment and having the right tool. It doesn't arrive like it was dispatched. I haven't told this story to many people, partly because I don't know what to tell. Whether this is the story of a man honoring a promise to an old road partner, or whether it's something that doesn't have a tidy description. One of those things that the road offers you, sometimes that doesn't fit in any category you are already using. My father used to say, "The road gives you what you need, not always what you expect." I expected a tow truck and a blown delivery. I got a man named Earl with an ignition relay in his kit, and 11 minutes, and a question I've been sitting with for 2 years. The Christmas after that one, I drove the same route. Not because it was assigned, I asked for it specifically. Flagstaff to Albuquerque, overnight, December 24th. I went through mile marker 333 around midnight. I had the CB on channel 19. I didn't stop. Nothing required me to stop. But I slowed down to 45 as I passed that stretch of shoulder, just for a moment. The gravel looked exactly the same. The desert darkness was exactly the same. The stars, the cold, the silence between my engine and the next sound, which was nothing. I said, out loud, to nobody, or to whoever was listening, "I see you, Dad." Then I brought it back up to speed. The logbook I was running that night shows I arrived at Sunrise Distribution at 5:58 a.m., 2 minutes ahead of the opening. The Christmas bonus hit my account 3 days later. I drove 134,000 miles that year, which was the most I'd done in a single year since 2011. My Kramer Logistics record shows 0 late deliveries for the quarter. The photograph on the visor is the same one. 1991. Blue Kenworth, Tennessee. Grinning. The odometer on the current Peterbilt, a different one, a newer one Kramer assigned me last spring, rolled over 350,000 miles last week, somewhere on the Kansas plains, in the flat open country where the sky is so large that it stops feeling like sky and starts feeling like something else. I pulled over for 2 minutes when I saw the number coming up. I don't know exactly why. It seemed like someone should acknowledge it. On the CB, on channel 19, a voice I didn't know said, "Nice out here, ain't it?" "Yeah," I said. "It is." He clicked off. I pulled back onto the road. If there's a version of Earl Hutchins still driving somewhere out there, in a dark red Kenworth, running east on the I-40, keeping promises that most people would have let expire after 26 years, I don't know how to find him. And maybe that's correct. Maybe some people are supposed to be a CB transmission and a set of marker lights and then gone, and the wanting to track them down and make them explain themselves is missing the point of what they did. He stopped. In the dark. On Christmas. When he didn't have to. What he left in the cab is still in that safety deposit box. What he left in me is something I'm still working out. The coffee from Gallup has been gone since New Mexico. The relay he put in is still running. The road keeps going. I'll see you in the next one. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done with the money? I've been asking that question for 2 years, and I still don't have a clean answer. Hit subscribe before you go, because the next story is a different kind of road, a different kind of driver, and a different kind of reckoning, and you don't want to come in cold on that one. Channel 19. Always open. There's one more thing I haven't told you, because I've been trying to figure out where it fits. 2 weeks after Christmas, back in Flagstaff, that's where I was based at the time, renting a room from a woman named Carla, who had 4 cats and a strict rule against smoking inside the house, which was fine because I'd quit years ago. I was sitting at the kitchen table going through my logbooks. I do this periodically, a habit left over from the years before electronic logging, when you had to keep manual records that could survive a DOT inspection. I still keep a personal paper log alongside the ELD because old habits don't die, they just get redundant. I was looking at the December 24th entry, and I noticed something I'd written in the margin at mile marker 333, a note I make whenever I have an unplanned stop, logging the time and reason. I'd written 2347, engine failure, electrical, relay, assist from Earl H, eastbound, departed 034. Earl H. I'd written his initial without thinking about it, like I already knew his last name started with H, which, on December 24th, at midnight, I didn't. He'd only told me his first name on the CB. He hadn't given me a last name until the text message I didn't read, until after the delivery, after the motel, after I'd found the money. I looked at that margin note for a long time. Then I flipped back through the log to the previous December, and the one before that. My father died in 1997. December 18th, 9 days before what would have been Christmas. I have driven every Christmas Eve since 1998. Some years by assignment, some years by request. I've never spent Christmas at home, partly because I don't have a home the way most people mean the word, and partly because the road is where I feel most myself, and the holidays are when the road is at its most itself too. Something about the weight of the season pressing on people makes them more human, somehow. The truck stop workers, and the dock workers, and the late-night counter staff who are there when everyone else is home. It's a version of the world that I understand. I've driven the I-40 in December 12 times in 26 years. Mile marker 333 is where I've always fueled the first time on the westbound trip, which means it's a familiar landmark on my internal map. On the eastbound run, it's the midpoint of the hardest stretch, the long, dark, unlit section between Flagstaff and Gallup, where the desert is most itself, where the road feels most like it belongs to something older than trucks or asphalt. I don't know what to make of any of this. I've said that already. I'm saying it again because I want to be clear about what kind of story this is. It's not the kind with a resolution. It's the kind with a weight. The weight sits different ways depending on the day. Some days it feels like grief I didn't finish. Some days it feels like something being looked after. Some days it's just a mystery on the I-40 and the money is in a box and the relay is still running. And none of it adds up to anything you can explain at a truck stop counter at 2 in the morning without sounding like a man who's been alone on the highway too long. Which is a fair description of me, most of the time. I'll admit that. But the relay held. All the way to Albuquerque, and on every run since. 300,000 additional miles on different trucks, and I've been carrying a spare ignition relay in the parts box behind the passenger seat, a habit I'd had for 2 years before that night, and that I'll have for however many years are left in my logbook. And every time I open that box and see the relay sitting in its spot, I think, that's the one he left. That's the one he chose not to take back. Which is a strange thought, because why would he take it back? He fixed the truck. That's what you do. You use the part, you leave, you move on. Except I don't move on. That's the honest part. I keep driving the same routes, crossing the same mile markers, and the road keeps offering me the same questions without any new answers. Maybe that's the job. Maybe that's what 26 years on the asphalt gets you. Not wisdom exactly, but familiarity with the questions that don't resolve. My father knew that. He drove for 18 years and came home the same man who left, except tired. The road didn't change him. It confirmed him. I think about that differently now than I did at 23, when I thought the road was supposed to transform you. You go out, you come back different. You've learned something. That's the story we tell about travel. But the road isn't travel. The road is work. And work doesn't transform you. It reveals you. You find out what you're actually made of, not what you imagined you were made of. You find out whether you stop for the guy on the shoulder, or whether you run the calculation and keep moving. You find out whether you can drive through a desert night after an engine failure and a stranger's kindness, and still make your window. You find out who taught you things you didn't know you'd been taught. The answer to that last one, for me, is a man named Walter Reyes, who drove for Consolidated Freight out of Memphis for 11 years, who came home on weekends and didn't bring the road with him, and who apparently, somewhere in those 11 years on the highway, somewhere on the CB, or in a truck stop diner, or in a parking lot after a long run, asked someone to look out for his kid. And the someone said yes, and kept his word 26 years later on a December night at mile marker 333 on the I-40 in the Arizona dark. I don't have anything to add to that. Some things you leave where they are. The relay is still running.